Hey there! So today I want to show you how I made this embroidered collar and this cross stitch one. So it's really not hard. I'm not really into embroidery that much. I'm definitely more of a cross stitcher, and to be honest, this was my first embroidery project. Definitely it's not the best, but I think it looks cute, so I'm definitely gonna wear it. And when it comes to sewing, you can hand sew it. I used my sewing machine, but it's not big, as you can see, and it's not very complicated, so you don't need any crazy sewing skills to make it. And okay, I will try not to ramble too much this time, so without further ado, let's get started. First, let's talk about all the necessary materials. Obviously, we're gonna need some fabric. It can be really anything, but the best would probably be cotton, linen, maybe some poplin. I'm gonna use cotton, white for the embroidered color, and black for the cross stitch one. Next one is optional, and it's a fusible interfacing in a matching color. It's gonna make the collar more stiff and it's gonna keep its form better, but like I said, it's not necessary. I will make one collar with and one without it. Next thing is an embroidery needle, or if you're making a cross stitch one, it can be a cross stitch needle. Next, embroidery thread in any colors that will work for the project you have in mind. And only for cross stitch one, some Aida, I will use black 14 count. Embroidery hoop. It can be any hoop, but the best will be not too big. Next, something for fastening the collar. I will show you two options: a ribbon to tie it, or a button with an elastic loop. And lastly, some basic supplies like scissors, a ruler, some thread, pins, and a measuring tape. It's not here, but I will also use a pencil and a tailor's chalk. I'm also gonna use my sewing machine, but you can hand sew it, so then you will need a needle too. Now let's figure out what pieces we will need. I explained it while drawing. So for our collar, we will need a collar stand and a collar. So for the collar stand, you want it to fit nicely around your neck, and it's just gonna be a rectangle, like a kind of a belt. And this measurement here will be your neck measurement. In my case, it was 33 centimeters. And here, we don't want it to be too thick, and I thought about 3 centimeters, and yeah, 3 centimeters work for me. So these are the measurements that we wanted to have, like when it's sewed. So actually what we'll do, we want to have 2 layers, so we will double it. So we'll have another 3 centimeters here. And we also want to add seam allowance. So we will add 1.5 centimeters on every edge. So 1.5 centimeters here, and 1.5 here, and here as well, and here as well. So 33 plus 1.5 plus 1.5 is 36 centimeters. And here we have 6 plus 1.5 plus 1.5, so it's 9. So the piece that we're going to cut is 36 by 9 centimeters. And for the collar, we will make 2 separate pieces because we want the button or the ribbon to be at the back. It will look like, when it's unfolded like this, it will look like this, something like this, right? So here is our collar stand. So we'll have 2 separate pieces. So every piece should be half of the collar stand. So in my case, it will be 16.5 centimeters. And here, so you should figure out what width would work for you. If you want really big collar or smaller, I think I will go for a smaller one, but obviously you can make any measurement you like. I will make it 4 centimeters here and 5 centimeters here. So it will go like this, but I will explain it later. But we will make it angled here, so it will go something like this. But this measurement will be about 5 and this will be around 4. but we will make the construction later, like I said. So now I'll grab a new piece of paper and we'll draw a simple pattern for this. I will not make a pattern for this. You can if you plan to make more than one color, but I will just draw it directly on my material. Okay, so now let's draw a pattern for our color. So my measurement for the color was 16.5 centimeters, so I will just simply draw that straight line. And here I wanted 4 centimeters, and you should probably make sure you have the 90 degrees angle here, but I'm just gonna eyeball it. And here I want something about 5 centimeters, so I will just mark it here. And to about, I think this point, it's also eyeballed, so I imagine my color to go like this. So I guess to this point I want it to be straight, so I will just draw a straight line to this point. And from here I'm gonna just make it like an arced a little bit, like here, like this. And colors usually don't just end straight, they are angled a little bit like this. So I will just make a line from here. Again, I will just eyeball it. I'll make it like something like this, and I will connect these lines with these lines. So in the end it looks like that. Alright, so this is our color without seam allowance. So, but I want to make another one with seam allowance, so I will just gonna cut this out. And now I'm gonna just copy it. And I will add 1.5 centimeters seam allowance all around it. I will just mark it in a few places. Alright, and this is my final piece with seam allowance, and I will also cut this out. Of course, at this point you can try it kind of on your neck and see if this is the size that you are okay with. This is the final size of the color, so you get idea of how more or less it will look. Then I realized it would be better to just cut out the inner part, leaving seam allowance only, instead of having two separate pieces with and without seam allowance, so that's what I did. And it was time for embroidery / cross stitch. Let me show you the embroidery option first. At first I planned to make two embroidered colors. First floral with lilac-like florals, and the second one with barbed wire. But I didn't manage to make both. I will probably make the barbed wire too, and when I do, I will post it on my Instagram. I looked for some inspiration online and I just drew something pretty simple. Of course, you can make any design you can think of. There is plenty of embroidery inspiration online, so you might want to explore it before you figure out what you'd really want. I picked these colors for my design, and I proceeded to preparing my fabric. I cut out a piece that was a bit bigger than both my collar pattern and my embroidery hoop, so it will both fit the collar and also I will be able to put it conveniently in my embroidery hoop. I cut two pieces from folded material, so in the end I have two mirrored collar fronts. Then I drew an outline of the collar without seam allowance, so I have an idea of the area I can embroider on, and I drew the design by hand. For me it wasn't really important to make it perfectly symmetrical, but if you want it perfect, you can use tracing paper for that. And I started embroidering with 4 strands of my floss. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I will show it in a second in cross-stitch part. I'm not an embroidery expert, like I said, so I'm probably not doing it like it should be done, but these techniques are what I found online. Also, if you're wondering why I don't just make it on a sewed collar, there are two reasons. It wouldn't fit nicely in a hoop, so it would be a lot less convenient for embroidery, and also this way the wrong side with all the mess and thread endings and all will be inside the collar once I sew it all, so I thought that would be a lot cleaner and nicer. Now the cross-stitch option. Making the project can be slightly more tricky here, so first I printed some grid paper in the same density as my Ada, so 14 count. Link will be in the description box below. Now you should think about what direction you want your crosses to go. I want just straight, so I drew a collar outline just like before, and I decided to make some text and settled on back off. You can go more wild, obviously. I made both sides, making sure the text is the same height on both, and that was it. When I proceeded to cutting the Ada, I made it just the same as with the embroidery one, but I just made sure the direction of crosses is like I planned. I decided to make white text and golden stars. I used 3 strands out of 6, so I split my floss and just started cross-stitching. What you're seeing is the second side of the collar, so I made sure the spacing to borders is the same as on the first I made, and then it's pretty straightforward. Now finally sew time. First I drew the collar stand I talked about at the beginning, and I used my pattern I made earlier and I drew the collar on the folded fabric, so I'll have 2 mirrored pieces. I cut it all out and then I drew the outline with seam allowance on the fabric with my embroidery, making sure I match the inner outline with what I drew on the fabric earlier. I cut it too. Then I cut the exact same pieces from the fusible interfacing. I skipped that step for the cross-stitch version. So there are all my pieces for the embroidery version and for the cross-stitch one. Next I ironed the interfacing on every piece, making sure the side with a glue is touching the fabric and not my iron. I cut whatever was sticking out, and while I was there, I prepared the collar stand. First I folded it in half with right side out, and then I folded the seam allowance, so 1.5 centimeter on both long edges. Then I sewed the collar, embroidered piece with a blank piece, right sides together on 3 edges, like this. Obviously I made both sides, then cut the corners and flip it right sides out. The more pointed the collar you made, the harder it will be to flip it. I then decided to cut the seam allowance all over and used a safety pin to work on these corners. Then I took the collar stand and I flip it back to the wrong side to sew the short edges. The important thing here is to sew from the folded edge only to the point where seam allowance that we folded earlier starts. At this point I will also put a ribbon inside in the way that it is in between, touching the right sides. So I made a little sandwich on both sides and sewed it, and then flipped it back to the right side. For the button option, I cut a small piece of elastic, about 5.5 centimeters long. I made a little loop out of it and I put it on one of the sides like I did with the ribbon and sewed it. When it will all be finished, I will just sew a button on the other side. Then I took my collar pieces and laid it like this on the collar stand. I pinned it together with only one side of the stand, with the seam allowance of the stand sticking out. That's important to sew it with one side only, so you have to make sure while sewing you don't accidentally catch the other side. Then I folded the seam allowance back inside. This is where the fact that we ironed it comes in handy. And I made sure the seam that I just made is all covered, and I sewed it very close to the edge. And that's all. I folded it so the stand is hidden, gave it a good iron, and it was ready. For the Crossstitch version, I made everything exactly the same, and then in the end I sewed this cute penguin button on, and it was done too. Alright, that's it. I hope you liked it. If so, then make sure to click the thumbs up. And if you decide to make any of these colors, then make sure to tag me on Instagram. I would love to see your creations. And for more sewing and cross-stitch related content, consider subscribing. And I think that's it for today, so see you in the next one. Bye!